Hey friend, welcome back to Lifestyle School, the podcast where we cut through the wellness noise and help you build a life that feels good, not just looks good on paper or social media. Today, we're talking about a topic that comes up constantly in my coaching practice. In fact, I would go as far as to say that this is one of the most misunderstood, underdiagnosed, and underaddressed issues affecting both women and men's health today, and that topic is insulin resistance. If you've ever felt like your body isn't responding the way it used to, if you've ever tried, quote, clean eating or watching your carbs and still feel stuck, and if you've been told your labs are normal, but something still feels off, I want you to know this episode is for you. We're going to unpack what insulin resistance actually is, the surprising ways it shows up in our daily life, and what it predicts if left untreated. And most importantly, what you can do about it starting now. So, before we get into it, as always, a quick disclaimer, I am not a medical doctor, and this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Always consult with your doctor before making any major health changes. With that, guys, let's get into it. So, to understand insulin resistance, first we need to understand insulin itself. Insulin is a hormone made by your pancreas, and its job is pretty simple. When you eat food, specifically carbohydrates, your body breaks that food down into glucose, a form of sugar that circulates in your bloodstream. Now, your cells need that glucose for energy if you're not like accessing body fat for energy, right? And I would say it's the easiest form of energy for your body to use. So in some ways, your body prefers glucose, but glucose can't enter your cells on its own. It needs a key, and that key is insulin. Insulin unlocks the door and allows glucose to move from the bloodstream into your cells, your muscle cells, liver cells, fat cells, where it can be used or stored. Okay. And now here's where things get tricky. When we constantly bombard our bodies with more sugar and carbohydrates than we actually need, and when we're eating frequently, so like snacking, stressed out, sleep deprived, or just inflamed, our cells begin to ignore insulin's knock at the door, and the locks get rusty, is a good way to think about it. And when that happens, your pancreas says, no problem, I'll just make more insulin. So now you have more insulin in your bloodstream just to do the same job. This is insulin resistance. Your body is still making insulin. In fact, it's making too much insulin, but your cells aren't listening. And the scary part is this can go on for years, even decades, before your blood sugar starts to rise or your doctor says anything is wrong. Okay? So, excuse me, how do you know if you're insulin resistant? I want to be really clear. Insulin resistance is not something you can only spot on a lab test. In fact, by the time your fasting glucose after like a 12-hour, 8-hour fasting window, and then a glucose test or your hemoglobin A1Cs comes back high. And hemoglobin A1C, if you're not familiar, is like a 90-day snapshot of what your blood sugar is doing. And that is the number that's used to say if you're pre-diabetic or if you're type 2 diabetic. By the time your glucose or your hemoglobin A1C comes back high, the problem of insulin resistance has likely been simmering under the surface for a very long time. So let's break down into two buckets, what you can feel and what you can measure when it comes to this issue. First, let's talk about what you can feel. And these are the everyday signs that your metabolism is struggling and that you are likely insulin resistant on some level. So if you feel like you gain weight easily, especially around your midsection, that is a sign of insulin resistance. If you crash mid-afternoon and need coffee or sugar to push through, another sign of insulin resistance. If you feel hangry between meals or wake up hungry in the middle of the night, again, insulin resistance. If you crave carbs, especially sugar or bread, constantly, again, another sign of insulin resistance. And one thing I want to say about that too is, so women, the last week before they start menstruating, which is the 4th week of their cycle, they typically say they crave carbs. And So what's happening at the end of your cycle that causes this craving is your progesterone goes up. And when you're in a progesterone dominant state, you become more insulin resistant naturally. And like when we're in pregnancy, we become more insulin resistant naturally. And that is part of the reason why we crave carbs, especially sugar and bread. I just thought that would be an interesting thing to put out there. But this is a sign of insulin resistance. If you get skin tags or dark velvety patches on your neck or underarms, again, insulin resistance. And I actually had a conversation about this with my dermatologist at Stanford a year or so ago. And it's a field, she said, that's really just starting to develop. And I think that's really interesting that they're finally putting those two together. If you're struggling with fertility or PCOS-like symptoms, again, think insulin resistance. PCOS for most women is rooted in insulin resistance. If you feel tired even after sleeping, insulin resistance. And if you have stubborn acne or hormonal imbalances, a lot of the times, again, this could be an issue, not always only, but many times part of the issue is insulin resistance. And so these are signs that your body is struggling to move energy into your cells. And that's classic insulin resistance. That's essentially um, like a classic sign. And I think one thing that I also want to make clear, so many of our modern diseases and issues come with our cells not working the way that they're meant to, right? And part of that is glucose being able to get into the cell. So we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about autophagy, and they're all interconnected, guys. And so really learning how to take really good care of our cells, which is really what metabolic health is about, is going to fix not only our weight, but so many other issues with like modern day diseases that we talked about a lot 2 weeks ago. So now let's talk about what you can measure. This is where it gets frustrating for a lot of people because sadly, most conventional doctors don't test the markers, the right markers to catch insulin resistance early. Why they don't do this, I honestly don't know. I don't know if it's just not something that's talked about in medical school or what, but they'll look at your fasting glucose or maybe your hemoglobin A1C. And if those come back in range, they'll send you home with a clean bill of health. But you can have insulin resistance with normal blood sugar. And so it's really important that if you're having these symptoms, you look at your insulin and see what it's doing. Because again, like I mentioned earlier, insulin resistance can be brewing for years or even a decade before your blood sugar starts to go haywire. And at that point, it's a much harder to address the issue. So let's just take care of it on the front end, right? Before there's more disease processes happening. So the first thing to check on your blood work is going to be fasting insulin. Ideally, what I like to see for my clients is a fasting insulin of between 2 and 5. You're going to be optimized for fat burning and metabolic switching if you are within that range. I have never seen anyone come in at that range unless they're doing specific dietary and lifestyle things to keep their insulin low. It's almost impossible with a modern diet and lifestyle to have a fasting insulin of between 2 and 5. The other one that you could have test, little less known. I've actually never had this one done myself, but it's called HOMA-IR. And what that stands for is homeostasis model assessment of insulin resistance. So what it does is it calculates your fasting insulin and glucose, and you want it below 1.5. Another really easy one to have done, and usually your doctor will do this on a metabolic panel, is both your triglycerides and your HDL. And what you want to do is look at the ratio, your triglycerides to HDL ratio. And ideally, that number would be under 2. We want low triglycerides and we want high HDL. And then the last thing that you can look at is ALT, GGT, and ferritin. Because when these are elevated, they suggest liver distress and early metabolic dysfunction. A huge issue now is that people are getting non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and it's destroying their liver. And they're even seeing this in young adults, in youth, and children, which is devastating because you need your liver. It's an essential organ. And if you destroy it, you're not going to live very long and you're not going to live very well. So you have to take care of your liver. You don't want the scarring of the liver that happens with elevated blood sugar. And so the good news is that with diet and lifestyle and exercise, you can address elevated liver enzymes, but it's something you got to be paying attention to. And I want to be super clear, fasting insulin is one of the most sensitive and earliest markers for insulin resistance. And unfortunately, most doctors won't test it unless you ask. So you have to be advocating for yourself. And advocating for yourself is a huge thing that we talk about in Lifestyle School for Weight Loss. My goal with this podcast, with Lifestyle School for Weight Loss, my course, or even my coaching is to educate you and empower you to be your own best advocate, whether that's with your doctor, whether that's in the grocery store, or it's like just setting up a life that helps you thrive and live at the weight that you want to be at, and with the health that you want. So let's talk about what happens if you don't do anything about insulin resistance, right? Because that would be the easiest thing to do. You're like, well, hope I have some of these symptoms, but I don't want to make any big changes. Here's a really hard truth. Insulin resistance is the root of nearly every modern chronic disease. And like, this is a big deal. Let that sink in. Insulin resistance is the root of nearly every modern chronic disease. So it's not just about weight. I talk a lot about insulin resistance and about how high insulin blocks your body's ability to store, like to go use stored body fat as energy, which is what you need to do to be able to lose body fat. It's an essential part of what I teach in Lifestyle School for Weight Loss is how do we manage insulin so that your body can actually metabolically switch between burning glucose for energy from the food you're eating, then to switch to stored body fat to be used as energy when you're fasting or when you're, eating more of a low carb diet. And so some of these modern chronic diseases, just to name a few, are type 2 diabetes, heart disease and stroke, Alzheimer's disease, which is actually now being called type 3 diabetes of the brain, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which I mentioned earlier, PCOS and infertility, certain cancers, especially breast cancer, endometrial cancer, and colon cancer, and then things like mood disorders, anxiety and depression, and then chronic fatigue and accelerated aging. And this is why I get so passionate about teaching this, is because if we can address insulin resistance early with our diet and lifestyle, we can prevent so much suffering down the road. And I think next week I'm doing a podcast on it's easier to stay out of trouble than get out of trouble, which like sounds really good when you say it, but I don't think many times we really live that way. But if we can address insulin resistance early, we are going to keep ourselves from so much pain and suffering down the road. And that is a really, really big deal. So why do I keep emphasizing early? It's because insulin resistance is silent at first. Your body is extremely adaptable. It works harder behind the scenes to keep things looking normal on the outside. But once those systems start to break down, once your pancreas can't keep up anymore and your blood sugar starts rising, you're already in the danger zone. And, I think we have been taught as a society that, our body works in siloed systems, but that is not at all how our body actually works. If you have high blood pressure, or if you have, my brain is blanking, if you have type 2 diabetes, those aren't, a siloed disease. those are going to affect all the other organ systems of your body negatively, right? So by then, many people are facing multiple diagnoses, being put on multiple medications, and metabolic damage at this point takes longer to unwind. And this is something that I work with clients all the time. It's like if you're in a spot where you're really unhealthy, if you've been in, eating really unhealthy or living a really unhealthy lifestyle from, diet, lifestyle, stress, sleep, all that for a really long time, it's going to take a long time to recover. With this, like changing your body's physiology to become healthy isn't like a snap your fingers and you're better in a couple weeks. Like it could take years of intentional lifestyle focus to truly be 100% better, depending on how long you've been sick. And so you can make huge changes. You can reverse insulin resistance. And with that, a lot of these chronic diseases can be fixed naturally without surgery, without necessarily medication, with diet and lifestyle, but it is going to take much longer. However, if you catch it early or even suspect it and just take action, you can reverse it, and it's going to be a much simpler process. And you can calm the system, you can lower your insulin, and you can retrain your cells to become more insulin sensitive again. And this is why I started Lifestyle School for Weight Loss. Why I started this podcast is because you can turn the ship around, and it doesn't require perfection. It doesn't require, these crazy protocols that punish your body or an impossible diet. It just takes a lot of intention and persistence and consistency. So let's talk about action steps. If you feel like, I hope a lot of this is resonating, a lot of these symptoms, I feel like I'm dealing with them. Here's how to start shifting your body out of insulin resistance and back into balance. And I want to tell you, this isn't rocket science. A lot of a lot of these steps I'm going to talk to you about are like the same action steps I give every week on every podcast on every topic, because it's true that they work, and our body just needs the right environment to heal. And it's really good at doing that when we give it the right tools and the resources and the environment. So number one is you have to focus on whole, real food. This means protein, it means healthy fats, and it means fiber-rich vegetables and fruits. You got to ditch the ultra processed snacks, the sugary drinks, the inflammatory seed oils. These drive insulin resistance like gasoline on a fire. Okay. You got to get back to real whole foods. Number two is you have to stop snacking all day long. Give your body breaks between meals so insulin can come down. Every time you put a bite of food in your mouth, you trigger insulin. And for some people, it never gets a rest. So you got to start eating your 2 to 3 meals a day, and then you have to be done. Okay. Use fasting wisely. So fasting isn't starvation, it's strategic rest for our metabolism. Even like a 12 to 14 hour overnight fast can begin lowering insulin. You don't need to jump into a long fast tomorrow, but build up gradually. And this is exactly what I teach you how to do in Lifestyle School for Weight Loss. If you're interested in learning more about that, check out my website at www.hopecoaching.com. Number four is walking after meals. Seriously, just 10 minutes after dinner can cut the insulin spike by half. And that's a really powerful move, and it's completely free. And a lot of times it's really relaxing. Number five, lift heavy things. As you know, I am a huge proponent of lifting heavy weights. Muscle is your metabolic gold. The more muscle you have, the more glucose your body can burn without needing much insulin. Resistance training makes your cells more sensitive to insulin again. So you have to be taking advantage of this. Number six is fix your sleep. I talk so much about sleep because I think so many people underestimate the importance of sleep. Poor sleep raises your cortisol, which raises your insulin. And, you could be eating perfectly and still be stuck if you're always running on fumes. You have to get that 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night. I did a podcast episode that a lot of people give me really great feedback on a number of weeks ago. I don't remember the podcast episode number, but you can look it up. Ideally getting into bed by 10 and optimizing those hours of sleep between 10 and 2 a.m. And then number 7 is you've got to lower chronic stress. I know, easier said than done. Again, I have done a podcast episode on stress. But chronic cortisol keeps your body stuck in insulin resistance. There's 2 pathways to insulin resistance. There's food and like blood sugar dysregulation via food intake. And then the secondary pathway is stress and cortisol. And you have to make space for yourself to breathe, to unplug, to journal. You have to set boundaries with people, with activities, because your hormones are truly listening. And so you have to pay attention. So with that, guys, I want to leave you with this. Insulin resistance is not a life sentence. It's a message from your body. And that message is, I'm trying to adapt to something that isn't working. And you don't have to be perfect, but you need to be aware. You need to have a plan that works for your life, not against it. And you need to take action before the storm hits. Prevention is so important when it comes to insulin resistance and the downward effects of that. So if this episode resonated with you at all, I would feel so honored if you'd share it with someone you care about. This is the kind of information that can truly change or even save someone's life if they are dealing with chronic disease. And, if you're ready to take the next step, I want to invite you to join me inside Lifestyle School for Weight Loss, where we tackle insulin resistance at the root and really work to create a sustainable lifestyle that helps your body heal, that helps you lose weight and feel strong again and in really good health. So with that, guys, I want to just say thank you so much for being here. Please review, like, comment on this episode. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for caring about your health in a world that sometimes makes that really hard to do. With that, guys, we'll see you next time on the Lifestyle School podcast.